Cameron Chardukian here with the Daily Developer Show. This is the show where we talk about every single day about how you can become a better developer and how to optimize your lifestyle as a developer. As you can see, as we're starting this video, I'm enjoying the remains of this big bag of tamarind I just had. So I'm doing pretty well today. But what I want to talk about with you in today's episode is whether programmers are socially awkward. Because I was searching on Google, trying to do some research about what things you guys may be interested in hearing more about. And when I searched why are programmers, the first result was why are programmers socially awkward? So first let's discuss whether this is true, and then let's continue with why is this the case? So first of all, to get to the point, yes, I do agree that programmers tend to be more socially awkward than, other people in skilled professions. And I think the reason for this is there are multiple reasons for this actually. One, you need to understand that in order to become a good programmer, it requires many, many hundreds, if not 1,000 or 2,000 hours of practice. Just sitting by yourself with a computer before you're ready to work your first job. So try to think about what type of people would be willing to go through that just sit at the computer alone for 1,000 hours without getting any payoff. Well, in general, that would tend to be people that are introverted or people that just don't really have that good of social skills. So, of course, the first thing to consider is that programming is self-selecting for people that are more likely to be awkward, because those are the people that would generally have the patience to get into it. So, apart from being self-selecting, however, we also need to understand that our mind has both logical and emotional aspects to it. For example, if let's say you were like dancing at the bar or club with your friends, and then I asked you to solve some quadratic equation problem, you'd kind of be like, what? Like it would just feel kind of off because your mind was engaged in a certain emotional state. So to pull yourself out of that state would be very, very difficult. By the same token, let's say you just spent the last 4 or 5 hours really focused. You're studying for some final exam in university and you're just exhausted now. If I said, hey dude, let's dance, put on the music, we're gonna dance, you'd be kind of like, yeah, dance. It would just feel kind of off because it's very difficult to jolt yourself from one emotional state to another. But think about how people usually relate. We usually relate to each other emotionally through the stories we tell, rather than being like super logical in our interactions. In general, when we're talking with friends, the goal is to elevate the positive emotional experience of each person, rather than always necessarily trying to get some logical point across. However, now let's go back to programmers. What emotional state do you think programmers tend to be in at work? Well, of course, it's being in a focused, logical state. So, when programmers go to socialize, especially if they don't have a high level of social awareness, it can be very difficult for them to move from that logical state to having more fun and being in a more social state. So even if that programmer actually has decent social skills, you may perceive them to be a bit awkward simply because they haven't pushed themselves back into that emotional state from the logical state they've been in all day. And those, I think, would be the 2 or 3 biggest reasons that programmers tend to be awkward. Again, to review, it's number 1, the software development industry is self-selecting, and that in order to make it into this industry, you had to have had the loneliness or the patience and the time alone to have been able to put in your 1,000 or so hours in order to develop basic competency required to get the job. And number 2 is that You're being constantly in a logical state at work makes it very difficult to move into an emotional, kind of social energetically charged state when you do go socialize. And actually, the last reason would be, if you think about how much face-to-face time programmers are getting versus how much face-to-screen time programmers are getting, programmers generally tend to get less face-to-face time where they're communicating with others at work versus other industries. So it's going to be more difficult for programmers to identify small social cues in general, such as a slightly raised eyebrow or somebody blinking quickly or a slight indication of discomfort on their face, because they haven't seen those patterns as many times because they're constantly focused on the screen rather than seeing these micro communications from other people. Whoa, that was a mouthful, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it kind of gave you some insights into why the stereotype that programmers are awkward, why that exists, why there is an element of truth to it, but at the same time, understand that programmers are not always socially awkward. There are many programmers that probably have better social skills than you or I, and that they're funny, they're charismatic. So yeah, well, understand that while this generalization, there is some validity to it, there are also exceptions. But we're ranting now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Daily Developer Show. Please subscribe. And remember, we do this every day, so I'll see you again tomorrow.